Chris Wyatt Reports. This is Chris live in central Pennsylvania. Today talking about not the angry, naughty children of the ANC, but rather about their little minions of misery. That's the economic freedom fighters. Their latest race hustling nonsense continues in South Africa. What are we talking about this time? Well, Ronaldo Khus warned us about this. He mentioned that there would be a motion in the Nelson Mandela Bay Town Council to remove statues. You see, members of the economic freedom fighters find statues of horses to be offensive, deeply offensive. This history of statue removal and this race hustling that continues started in South Africa and it found its way to America is disgusting and vile. You know, there's a statue of Vladimir Lenin in New York City. As an anti-communist, I find that deeply offensive. But my feelings aren't hurt. I'm not calling for its removal. You see, statues are part of history, and knowing our history makes a difference. So in a motion before the Nelson Mandela Bay Council, Councillor Dumbiso Quasi submitted this week. He called for the removal of statues depicting colonial and apartheid figures. Kwesi said there were more than 20 heritage statues in the metropolitan area, and that many reflected the influence of British and Dutch colonizers. Well, if that's the case, and it bothers you so much, perhaps you should build some monuments to the Nguni-speaking colonizers of Southern Africa and South Africa, so you won't feel left out. Just saying. You know, if it bothers you so much that Dutch and British colonizers have statues dedicated to their contributions to society and their history, maybe you should put some statues up for the Nguni-speaking colonizers who arrived about 1,600 years ago. They didn't arrive 1,600 years ago in the Eastern Cape. It was much after that. Now, never mind that these statues, one of them is dedicated to horses, and another is dedicated to reconciliation between Afrikaners and English after the disastrous Anglo-Boer War. So we can have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and that's acceptable. But we can't have statues to reconcile people. And while we're talking about this, the United States Army is in the process, starting December 16th, 2023, to remove a statue in Arlington National Cemetery that is also devoted to reconciliation. This one's devoted to reconciliation between the southern states and the Union. And they're going to remove the statue but leave the remains of Confederate soldiers who were buried in the cemetery. If anything, I would find the remains of Confederates who fought against the Union and were treasonous would be more offensive than the actual statue. But that's what's happening here. Now, Quasi argued that the statues preserve the unwanted and brutal history of our city and called for the immediate removal of all portraits of mayors from the corridors of City Hall. The mayors. The statue of Queen Victoria in Govan Mbeki Avenue. The Priester John Memorial, which is dedicated to Portuguese explorers. Of course, Priester John was African and black, and that they find offensive, African and black, in Fleming Square. And the Anglo-Boer War Memorial in Uitenhage. That's the reconciliation I've talked about. Now, Kwesi said the motion was submitted in a bid to remove reminders of apartheid and colonialism. For those of us who have a brutal history under those governments, we have taken the stance that we do not want to be reminded how we were dominated. Really? Do you think the Khoisan would like to have a little reconciliation, a little hearing about how they were dominated and pushed into the margins and chased into the Kalahari Desert and out of the highlands of eastern Zimbabwe and all of South Africa for the most part by the Nguni-speaking peoples? Now, he added that these statues, it causes so much pain. The statues don't have to be destroyed, but what we want is to see them. We don't want to see them here. We want to see what is representative of democracy. A group of privileged elites ended racial segregation and ushered in democracy in South Africa. So is Kwesi arguing that South Africa should be erecting statues to P.W. Botha and F.W. de Klerk? After all, they're the gentlemen who started to end the apartheid system, not the African National Congress. P.W. Botha and then ultimately F.W. de Klerk unraveled the racial legislation of apartheid. So should we be building monuments to them? Maybe. Now, the statues that he's talking about are representative of South Africa's democracy. Aside from Queen Victoria, they're all part of the multiracial tapestry that is South Africa. Only a racist could deny that truth. Nelson Mandela Bay Speaker Eugene Johnson, or as we affectionately call her, Eugit Johnson, said the motion had not been tabled at this week's council meeting because removing heritage statues and sites was regulated by another sphere of government. Eugene Johnson added that the engagement on the issue raised would take place and that the matter would be referred to the national government. Eastern Cape Provincial Heritage Resources Authority, that's a mouthful, manager Azola Nkosana said a permit would need to be obtained for removal of the statues. saying that municipalities cannot destroy any building or remove a memorial or statue without an ECPHRA permit unless that municipality has been assessed by the ECPHRA and found competent to perform the function. Now, of course, statues have been removed before in South Africa. One of the first ones, a controversial one, was at UCT, a statue of Cecil John Rhodes was removed on the 9th of April, 2015. That followed in a month of protests and sit-ins from uninformed, drivelly little whiny South African college students who know nothing of the history of South Africa. They removed it. Now, arguably, the statue of Cecil John Rhodes is one that is contentious, but its removal denies history and covers up history. And so now people don't learn about Cecil John Rhodes. Now, a more contentious one in my book, and one that was disgustingly vile removal, was the statue of Orange Free State President Martinus Tenis Steen. Was removed from the front of the University of the Free State's Bloemfontein campus in 2020. That's now housed at the War Museum in Bloemfontein. Now, the removal got the green light from the Free State Provincial Heritage Resource Authority, a similar body to the one in the Eastern Cape we just talked about. Now, the University of Free State was established as a higher institution of learning in 1904 as a consequence of the direct push from Sten for a university. So, what exactly do they object to? His focus on higher education, tertiary education, or the fact that he was white? Is that what bothers him? Is that what they find offensive, that he was white? Is that not racist in and of itself? In November 2018, the rector and vice chancellor, Professor Francis Peterson, stated that a large portion of the student body felt unwelcome near the statue and that a special task team found that there could be no historical reinterpretation of the statue and that it should therefore be relocated. What historical reinterpretation? Because he advocated for tertiary education, or because he was white and you are racist? That's what's really at play here, folks. So let's talk about some historical figures in South Africa who are very controversial and, quite frankly, are offensive to many people, black and white. King Shaka, Shaka Zulu, the founder of the Zulu Empire, a bloodthirsty, maniacal serial murderer who butchered people for sheer enjoyment, who murdered all of his concubines so he would have no offspring, so he'd have no children, who would assassinate him to take the throne. The bloodthirsty, murderous scumbag, King Shaka. Well, that's going to offend some Zulu. Well, we'll take the scumbag portion out. That's editorializing. But the rest of that is simply a statement of historical fact. Why in the world is an airport in Durban named the King Shaka Airport, International Airport? That's deeply offensive to people who aren't Zulu, whose ancestors were murdered, whose ancestors were assimilated, whose ancestors were robbed and defrauded by the Zulu. The Ndebele, for example, find that deeply offensive. So are we going to rename that and take that down because it's just inconvenient? It offends people? By the same token, King Shaka forged an incredible empire that was impressive and occupied a huge portion of what is today South Africa, and did so with continuous warfare and organized his military in revolutionary styles. There you go. What about Nelson Mandela capture site? Is that deeply offensive? Nelson Mandela was captured by apartheid police authorities just outside Howick. There's a museum there. It's a paean to Nelson Mandela talking about the liberation struggle. So that's one side of the aisle, but he was also arrested there. Do we tear that down because it's offensive to the memory of Nelson Mandela? Or do we tear it down because, of course, Nelson Mandela is a self-admitted terrorist, among many other things, a pugilist, a barrister, a freedom fighter, a president, and a self-admitted terrorist? So should we tear down everything tied to Nelson Mandela? Because some people find it deeply offensive, particularly those whose lost family members murdered in attacks by Umkhonto we Sizwe. Umkhonto we Sizwe has a veterans group. Should the Umkhonto we Sizwe veterans group, representing those who were once self-described terrorists, be disbanded because it's offensive to people? No, it's part of history. What about the ANC co-opting or appropriating the Anti-Apartheid Museum located in Sun City? It's closed now, I think, because of COVID. But what about that? Many people who walk through there, if you walk through there when it was first made, you'd be like, wow, what an impressive place. But if you went back subsequently, as I did on multiple occasions, you'll notice that it's an offense to South Africa's history, ignoring the Black Sash movement, ignoring the Black Consciousness movement, trying to co-opt that and claim that it was actually an ANC-led activity when it had nothing to do with the ANC. The ANC has made the end of apartheid appear to be an entirely ANC-led effort, when they had virtually no role in it until they started murdering Inkatha Freedom Party members in KwaZulu-Natal in the 1990s, the early 1990s. Prior to that, they were a nothing burger from 1962 Rivonia trial until the mid-1980s. They didn't cause liberation, the ANC. They were but one of many players. The Pan-African Congress, a bunch of commies whom I have no respect for, played a larger role than the ANC. People who are usually offended by history are frequently offensive themselves. And the little minions of misery from the economic freedom fighters are quite offensive themselves in their behavior. So why can't the EFF simply build something? What is wrong with having other statues, other monuments, other memorials? Well, mostly because people like those involved with the EFF don't build anything. They simply destroy. They simply destroy. That's all they do. They attack clicks locations, they burn down farms, they simply destroy people who support that kind of garbage. Absolute nonsense. Let's take, for example, Blood River in Kombe in South Africa. Anyone ever been there? Been there a few times. In KwaZulu-Natal, it's a long, bumpy road to get out there, a dirt road still, to this day, still not paved. But let's talk about this. There has long been a historical monument there for Afrikaners in recognition of the Battle of Blood River on the 16th of December, 1838, when under 500 truck bores fought off 10 to 20,000 Zulu warriors and defeated them with no casualties amongst the truck bores. When the National Party ruled South Africa, they built a massive monument out there made out of bronze wagons, replica-sized bronze ox wagons in a circle to approximate where the battle was, very close to the actual spot, and built a museum there to honor their history. Well, that was very one-sided. Eventually, another museum was opened up on the other side of the river to represent the Zulu who had fallen in the battle. Well, it's quite an impressive museum with lots of facilities. You can have events there. And they built a friendship bridge across it after the end of apartheid. After the ANC took over, a bridge was built across the river, the creek, the Blood River there. And so you can go from one to the other, and I've done that. In my first visit there, I didn't know there was a Zulu museum. I was very impressed by the Zulu museum. It was quite informative, quite helpful. The people who were there were very knowledgeable. And at the same token, on the opposite side, those who ran the museum, which at the time was under government control, but now it's run by a private institution which runs the Voortrekker Monument, they were also well informed and very helpful. And it was very, very informative from a historical perspective to better understand what happened on that spot. But my last trip there in February this year, in summertime, on a business day, during business hours, not lunch hours, not during a festiva or a siesta, but when people should be at work, there were people at the Trekboer side, at the museum. And they also know, by the way, Dean Chancey, as I mentioned, they mentioned Dean Chancey. But when I crossed the bridge, I found nary a human soul at the Zulu Museum. The building's all locked up, nobody there, no one to answer questions, no one to guide anyone, no one to tell anything. And the state of the site is in decline. It's in decline. As is any other sort of monument put in place in South Africa in the past 20 years. They're all falling to a state of disrepair because the government doesn't repair them. Has anybody been to the Battle of Isandlwana? Really? I've been there. Recently, this year, I went to Isandlwana, and the dioramas, the images, the pictures that are out there on these boards are the same damn ones that were there 30 years ago. They've never been repaired or replaced. The battlefield Isandlwana is falling into disrepair. Now, why should that be? That's something the Zulu people are incredibly proud of. They shellacked the British at Isandlwana. But instead of building things, the likes of the EFF and their minions of misery just destroy everything. Isandlwana is in a tragic state of disrepair and a lack of maintenance. Why? Because they don't care about history. They only care about lying about the present. And the EFF will lie about the present and claim things about people that are factually untrue to support their narrative for total control, for socialist elites running things, so that the likes of Julius Malema can run around with Philip Patek $10,000 watches, Breitling wristwatches, Land Cruisers, blue light escorts, helicopter rides out to Senegal, things that they're not entitled to, that they've never earned, off the sweat and the brow of other South Africans and the gullible who support them because they hand out three-piece streetwise KFC meals and T-shirts to get them to protest things that they don't understand or know nothing about. This is the legacy of the economic freedom fighters. Will it be a legacy of simply race hustling? What has the EFF accomplished in its 10 years of existence, other than enriching Julius Malema, Floyd Shivambu, and others? Has it built anything? 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 Yes, Mandela said they should not be renamed. Renaming them wipes out the memory of things. And by the way, Port Elizabeth, which is now Nelson Mandela Bay metropolitan area, wasn't an African settlement. There wasn't an African settlement. It wasn't like what the Romans did building on top of Carthage. It wasn't like what the Romans did building on top of other settlements when they conquered peoples. Well, Port Elizabeth was established as Fort Frederick in 1799 by the British. There's no one there. They built a fort to protect their interests there. That became Port Elizabeth Incorporated as a city in 1820, and then eventually became Nelson Mandela Bay metropolitan area later on, incorporating Dispatch and Uitenhage and other little places around it. So what exactly is being denied? The mythical story and lie about Pretoria, claiming that a Tswana-speaking chief named Shwana lived there and settled that area, which is nonsense. The Tswana people moved through the area, did not have a formal settlement. Pretoria was established by the Trek Boers. They built the town. Johannesburg was established by the Trek Boers and then flooded by the Uitlander, the Uitlander, the Outlanders, the foreigners who flooded in there for the gold rush. This effort to destroy history is pathetic, and it's perpetrated by racists and hate mongers. I have no objection to Confederate statues. I have no objection to army bases in the South being named after Confederate officers, even though I always found it puzzling. But understanding why it happened as part of reconciliation to rebuild a country, and now a century later, people want to bifurcate and destroy the country by tearing it apart. And the same thing is happening in South Africa. Removing history simply means it can be ignored. We should learn from our history. We should be proud of people who did the things to make life better, who advanced this life. Those who made the quality of living for all human beings a better situation. We should be celebrating them. And those who've not done so well, we shouldn't be ripping down their statues. Now, they ripped down the statue of Saddam Hussein, but that thing was gargantuan. It was monstrous. These are not intrusive statues. The picture of Queen Victoria sits in front of a public library. How is that offensive? People offended by these statues are ill-informed, and we have to ask the question, are they simply racist? Why was Sten's statue removed from the University of the Free State? There wouldn't be a University of Free State were it not for Sten, as the last president of the Orange Free State, pushing for that institution, that tertiary education institution. Why is it removed? What are they offended by? His name? Well, that's bigotry. Are they offended by his skin color? That's racist. But they removed it nonetheless in 2020. I think they should just remove the University of the Free State. What are they graduating? No world-class scientists or academics, that's for damn sure. Silly nonsense by silly people who can build nothing, who can accomplish nothing, like simply attacking others, whether it's in South Africa or here in the United States. This is the refuge of race hustling, leftist, communist, socialist who destroy everything. 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 Should we burn down the church where Karl Marx was married in Bad Kreuznach, Germany, because he was a communist? No. That's stupid. Should we tear down the house where he lived in Bad Kreuznach? No. That's stupid, just because he was a communist. It's ridiculous. The house where Adolf Hitler was raised in Braunau Inn still exists, and it should be torn down simply because it's the house where Hitler was raised. I've been there. Doesn't make me pro-Hitler, doesn't make me pro-National Socialist Workers' Party of Germany, the Nazi Party, quite the contrary. It makes me informed. It makes me erudite. Well, helps make me erudite. It makes me understand history better by experiencing history, by burying and hiding history because your feelings are hurt. You feel oppressed? You feel oppressed? Oh my goodness. You feel oppressed? We're getting this from people who are, I don't know when this guy was born, but born free is mostly where this nonsense is coming from, who never were oppressed. Absolutely ridiculous nonsense from these clowns. But Mdumiso Quasi, if you feel oppressed, if you feel offended by these statues of horses that celebrate horses, if you feel oppressed by statues or photographs of mayors who were mayors of the town before a majority took over, well, you need to check your attitude, because you might just be a little bit influenced by bigotry and racism. That's your problem. You don't change history by removing statues. You don't change history by removing photographs. What you do is you make new generations ignorant of what came before and what happens. Mr. Umdisu Kwazi, I submit to you that you should pay more attention to what's going on in Nelson Mandela Bay rather than your race-driven hatred, your racial hatred of other people. For instance, over 33% of the children living in the Eastern Cape don't live with their mother. They don't live with their father. There are no immediate parents in their lives, being raised by grandparents or family members, or worse, being trafficked. 33% of the children in the Eastern Cape. Where is your focus on that? I think that's a more pressing issue than removing a statue of horses or a reconciliation statue in Uitenhage. What about the fact that the Eastern Cape is one of the poorest provinces in all of South Africa? Where is your focus on poverty, informal housing? Some settlements, 46% of the housing is informal still to this day. Where's your focus on that? What about your focus on the fact that the government returned 67 million rand of money meant for childhood feeding programs to ensure childhood nutrition, national money sent down to the Eastern Cape for Nelson Mandela Bay, and then sent back to the national government, while over a dozen infants and toddlers starved to death, black and colored infants and toddlers starved to death in Nelson Mandela Bay. Where is the EFF on that issue? They're nowhere to be found, because it's not sexy. It's not racist to tell the truth about the governance failures. It's simply the truth. And they can't make money from their deep-pocketed donors whom they fail to report to the Independent Electoral Commission. Yeah, this is just more nonsense from the EFF. They have contributed nothing to South Africa. Nothing, 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 nothing. What will their legacy be? One of race hustling? One of distortions, lies, grifting, VBS? Malema's Breitling watches and Land Cruisers? What will the legacy be? It's not a legacy of governance, because they govern nothing. They're simply malcontents and minions of misery. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for tuning in. I appreciate your support for the channel. Be sure to hit the like button and feel free to leave a comment behind. Hopefully people will watch this video. And of course, the inevitable is going to come. The race hustling wankers and haters from the political left are going to come on here, and even a few South Africans maybe on the right, and go, well, why don't you look at your own house? It's not in order. Hey, I report and cover on the shortcomings and frailties of my own country plenty. This is a video about race hustling and the legacy of the EFF in Nelson Mandela Bay and South Africa in general. Not about those issues. You want to talk about those issues? Then show up when I do the news and talk about the shortcomings of America, where 5,000 criminal alien invaders cross our border every single day and get relocated by a corrupt government in Washington, D.C. at our expense. I'll be happy to talk about it there. But this is about the EFF and it's garbage. Thanks a lot, everybody. Be sure to hit the like button. If you're not a subscriber, why don't you become one? We could use support on this channel, which is heavily censored and shadow banned by the minions at YouTube. Thanks a lot, everybody. Have a good day. Appreciate it. God bless and be safe out there. The EFF, the minions of misery. There you have it. By the way, happy Hanukkah to our Jewish friends. We're in the middle of Hanukkah right now. And Merry Christmas to all the Christians who celebrate Christmas, and to everybody who celebrates the secular holiday as well. I wish you a Merry Christmas.